Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm Taya Israel, and I'll be your host today. Today, we're going to be talking about an interesting topic, one that I've been dwelling on a lot, and it is purpose in creating your best life. Within this discussion, we're going to also be distinguishing the factors between yourself and your sense of self, and how that even matters, and as well, what we're really serving or what are we really servicing within our life, and how we can uproot the things that we need to uproot and get to work on the things that we need to get to work on. I'm really excited to talk about this. Stay tuned. So I have my notes here. I'm going to be reading from this and this here. Yeah. But first we're going to start off with the distinguishing factors between the self and your sense of self. So what is the self? It's not who you think you are. It's not what you think it is. So the self is distinguished from the ego that develops. So the ego develops, and you're born without an ego, but your ego develops as you grow. But that is not the self. The self with a capital S is the organic unity that takes care of us, that is propelled to heal us, that is propelled to express and grow. The unconscious factors that we are unaware of. The fact that we're breathing right now without having to consciously breathe. We are growing in instances. We're growing our nails, hair, without having to consciously do these things. That is the self. But then what about the sense of self? And where does that come from? Our sense of self originates in the experiences that we've had and the stories that we create out of those experiences, the stories we tell ourselves out of those experiences. And those stories become grounds for defining ourselves. Okay, so now that we've finished discussing the differences between the sense of the self and the self, I want to talk a little bit more about the introspective workings of our unconscious minds, and particularly complexes. So what a complex is a cluster of energy, I would say, that forms around the stories that we tell ourselves and the pieces that we identify with. And as I mentioned before, when I spoke of the sense of the self grounds in the experiences that we've had and the stories that we've told ourselves about those experiences. And that becomes the grounds for defining ourselves. So these complexes can stem from culture, and they do stem from culture or trauma, and they can be identified with. But as I mentioned before, particularly they're unconscious. The premise is unconscious, but they can be pieces of our story, such as, I identify with my success. That is an external factor of my story. I identify with the fact that I have to go to work. I have to make 40 hours a week. These things that my culture is impressing upon me that I have correlation with. I guess you can say that. So we begin to develop these complexes, and these are personalities. These are personalities. And like I mentioned before, there are splintered personalities. And keep a pin in their unconscious. So they become pieces of us that we identify with. And I kind of think of it like an unconscious knot that we have to untangle within ourselves in order to really understand. But the more unconscious, the more autonomy the unconscious thing has to grow, to develop, to be the inaccurate thing you're reacting from. Because 9 times out of 10, we're not reacting from the correct premise, I should say. But I'm glad I brought that up because I want to add that we don't do crazy things as people. We do logical things based off of the premise that we have. Now, the premise isn't always accurate. More times than not, the premise is inaccurate. But again, we don't do crazy things. We always do logical things. If we understand though what we're in service to, then we're able to make a logical decision based off of an accurate premise. So, how do you begin to identify what you're of service to within yourself? This comes in handy when you're trying to identify purpose as well. Because within identifying your purpose, you have to ask yourself, what do you really want to do? Who do you really want to be? And often, more than not, that definition or those answers come from external impressions. And, the culture is saying, it's all about being successful. It's all about making money. It's all about being in that neighborhood or buying that thing. But what is most meaningful to you? And that's what we're going to be talking about in just a minute. But I don't want to forget about the premise because that is definitely important in identifying what you're in service to. But like I mentioned, like I was asking before, how do you identify your premise or the accurate premise? Now, it becomes a little difficult because you can identify your premises by honestly looking at your patterns and asking others what they see. And that becomes a little difficult, like I said, because a lot of people can't bear to hear things that they find inaccurate, but can presumably be true. But it comes down to if you're okay with facing yourself in the mirror. Can you bear it, even if it is ugly? Because that's what we have to do to identify ourselves. That's what we have to do to identify our purpose. And a lot of the time, the water is murky before you can even start to answer those questions. And you have to take into consideration that it's not light work, the work of the soul. It is heavy work, and it is also supposed to be meaningful and that is why it's coming from the soul. So, in talking about meaningfulness, so if what we're doing is meaningful, and I grabbed this quote from a podcast that I listened to, if what we're doing is meaningful, as understood by your psyche, it will support you. And it makes a lot of sense. Even in the most treacherous of times, if you're supporting your soul, you can bear through it. You can get through that suffering. And adversely, if what the psyche perceives that what you're doing is wrong per se, it begins to pathologize. And I really like the definition or the origin of this word, psychopathology, because it means the expression of the suffering of the soul. And it takes me back to, being depressed, actually being depressed, not knowing your purpose, not knowing what you're doing in life, feeling like you have no mission. And this is crazy because we come into this world not even wanting to, and then we just need a mission. But it's like you have this need of a mission, and it's not derived from your external culture or these external messages or impressions. And I'm not saying that you have to ignore your culture, but your own soul has its own meaningful purpose. So your soul begins to express its own suffering within you by pulling you down, by depressing you. So I like this definition of the soul as a metaphor for the organic wisdom of the natural being that we are. And it talks about how a metaphor is the purposeful expression of the organic organism that propels you to grow, to heal when you're injured, to express itself, and things of that sort. So it comes down to purpose and choice, because there is choice within purpose. In unraveling your patterns and identifying your own premise, you become less estranged to who you are within you. You become more familiar with yourself. And your life becomes less of a reaction to your environment, your impressions, but more of a generative life, a thing that you generate from within you. It becomes meaningful. And you have to be able to bear to look at yourself. It won't always be pretty, but it is a humbling experience. It really is, because now that you're humble, you're able to learn, and it puts you in the position of a student, because you don't know anything. I don't know anything. I don't. So it comes down to the thing that we have to be accountable for, which is the mission that I mentioned before. And to be an adult in general, it doesn't mean just to have a big body, but it means to be accountable for what's coming through you and being put forth out into the world through you. So we have an appointment with our own souls. We have this thing that we have to do, and we need to do it. And I'm not trying to hammer your head, but I kind of am, because it is important. So I thank you for listening to me throughout this beautiful time that we've shared together. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and definitely comment. I really would like to hear your thoughts, but I also hope you learned something, and that you can give me your own thoughts on this video, of your own stories and advice. Especially, I really love to hear that. So thank you guys for watching again, and I really appreciate it. I'll see you soon.